everybody, and welcome back to another episode of D&D Delver. Today we're going to be talking about mythology, yay! And the difference between D&D mythology and real-world mythology. As many of you guys probably know, a lot of D&D lore, species, things like that is derived from our normal day mythos. So like of course some of the more typical ones, sirens, pegasus, unicorns, creatures that are derived from and inspired by our real world mythology. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how you can use our real world mythology to kind of modify and homebrew your own campaign on in a way that you want it to fit type of situation. So this video may be geared a little bit more towards the homebrew people, but it's also going to be really good knowledge going into D&D. Just kind of, for me personally, reading about the actual mythology gives me an idea of how those creatures are going to react in a combat situation, um, which is awesome because a lot of mythology you learn about creatures via interaction. In D&D lore, they're just kind of like, this is what the creature is, this is what they do, type of thing. But it doesn't really give you real world situations, whereas our mythology from this is actually based around situations and encounters people have had with those creatures. So it gives you a little bit more of a better idea of how those creatures react. And it's also a really good contrast from D&D lore sometimes because like the first thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that there are some creatures in mythology that are actually in real world mythology that are represented as not necessarily evil, but aggressive and assertive and violent. And then in D&D lore, they're portrayed as nature-loving people. So it's really kind of interesting. But I am going to be leaning a little bit more towards mythology that I am familiar with, just so I don't give you guys wrong information. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how you can use those to reskin your creatures when you're playing D&D. So I guess without much more rambling, we can just go ahead and jump into it. So the first creature we're actually going to talk about is going to be, some people may know this creature, some may not, depending upon how new you are to D&D. And this is going to be interesting. I like this one because it shows a real type of contrast between the D&D lore and our world lore. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Firbolg class. Yay! Or not class, but race, but you know what I mean. So we're going to talk a little bit about them. So in D&D lore, they are portrayed as basically these creatures who love nature, who are humbled in solidarity, but they also have strongholds. They're in villages. Um, they're also known to be leaning more towards being in a druid class just because of how in tune they are with the woods around them and how peaceful they are, I guess. I don't know. Sometimes things don't make sense. And that's D&D lore. But in Mythos lore, in our real world lore, we're going to be talking a little bit about who they were and how they got their name. So, Firbolgs are actually derived from Irish mythology. They are actually, so of course they're not really a creature in Celtic mythology. They are and they aren't. So this is kind of weird. This is where the mythos and reality kind of like collide. So basically in the mythology they're depicted as these violent creatures. But basically, what they really are is they're a group of people, and so without getting too in depth about all the nitty gritty history of mythology, um, in the beginning, Ireland was depicted to be 6 by 6 groups of people. Um, and basically, one of these groups got exiled to Greece, and they got a new name. Their name was the Firbolgs. And when they were sent back, they were actually, or they weren't sent back. They decided to go back, um, and basically take their land back after they got exiled. Um, and when they did that, they kind of got into a lot of fights with a lot of the other, I guess, groups or fractions, whatever you want to call them. And so with the Furbolgs, they were kind of outcasted. So in mythology, they kind of get demonized a little bit. Um, but basically, they came back. They started this war. They got back their land, and then 37 years later, another king arrives in the land, and he was basically like, "Hey, give me half my island back because this is not how it's supposed to be. You're not even supposed to be here." And the Furbolgs were like, "No, we won this land fair and square. It's ours." And so basically they got into another battle, got into another war, etc., etc. And eventually what wound up happening was the Furbolgs lost, and they were of course, the other people the other people came in, they took their land back, yada yada yada. But what's interesting is the Furbolgs were actually, their king was slain by Morgana. So if you guys know Morgana from Irish history, she's like this really kick butt wizard person. Um, and so it's just kind of interesting to see how basically these Furbolg creatures came from. They were basically kind of scrutinized for violence and aggression and all this stuff. And that's the complete opposite of how D&D lore has depicted them. So it's like, it's interesting to see where they go with some of these classes. Another thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is the Fae. This one I might talk a little bit more extensively about. Alright, so with the Fae, we all know there is huge amounts of lore on them, right? At least in Irish and Celtic mythology. And I mean huge, huge amounts. In D&D lore, they're pretty much just chalked up to whatever classification they have. Now, here's another interesting thing that some of you guys may not have known. There are fey creatures in actual mythology, such as changelings and trolls. They're considered fays. Whereas in D&D lore and classification, they're kind of in a separate area. I mean, changeling is a playable race. But it's not considered a fey creature, or of fey origin. So like how elves are of fey origin as well. They actually have like the fey ancestry and things like that. Ironically, changelings are a type of fey, but they don't obtain any of those features or attributes. Um, so like I said, I'm just kind of pointing out differences here in like mythology and D&D lore. So like if there's things that you like that you want to take and apply it to a creature or a race or something like that for your players, you absolutely can. And it makes it more intriguing, and I feel like it gives depth to the characters and the classes. Because now if you consider a changeling fae, you can decide on whether or not they get additional features or not, but now they have a connection with a whole nother realm other than the material realm. They're now considered part of basically what There's two groups in Fey mythology. There's the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court. Basically, the light and dark, the balance to them. And so with changelings, they're considered unseelie Fey. And I say this is interesting because I'm going to take one of a character that I've played in the past, or a character that I currently play. Her name is Mitzi, and she's a changeling. She is. So, with her history, she kind of has a thing against unseelie Fae. Now, what would be interesting about this is if my DM decided to implement a rule or some type of thing into the game that brings into the fact that changelings are part of the unseelie Fae, that might just like completely skew my character and how she reacts and what she does. And if that were to come through via story, I mean, I don't know what she would do, but it would be kind of amazing. Um, but anyways, that's kind of one of the other things. Another thing that D&D lore does not consider Fae is elementals. So in Fae mythos, elementals are considered part of the Fae culture, um, and species, I guess. I'm not sure if they're actually, this part I'm not too sure about. I don't know if they are a, here we go. Elementals, a theory that Fae were intelligent species descended from humans, an alchemist, blah blah blah. So basically, they weren't really considered part of the Seelie or the Unseelie or Seelie court. They were kind of considered, um, basically Earth being reborn, but they were still part of that Feywild feel, that Fey culture, um, because they were known to play. And this is another thing in mythology: Fey creatures are actually known to play true to who they are, um, and they have different quirks and things like that. So when we talk about a Fey creature getting involved in, I guess, a combat situation, let's say you're going up against a leprechaun in combat. I don't even know if D&D lore has an actual leprechaun that you could use, or just a creature in general that's similar to a leprechaun. So let's say you're going up against them. Now, in regular lore, uh, leprechauns are known to count their gold. They are very, very meticulous about their gold. If a piece of gold gets stolen, they go after the person until they have it back. They'll hunt them down through generations, and they get very, very violent if their gold is taken. Um, so in D&D lore, I don't even know. Actually, I don't even know if D&D. So I'm not even gonna say D&D lore because I don't even know if they have an actual leprechaun. You know what? Let's look it up. Leprechaun D&D 5e. Nope. Okay. So they do not have an official leprechaun lore for D&D. But let's say you were going up up against one, and you he had his pot of gold. Obviously, he had his baggie. He had something with him, and you were to, instead of just attacking him, you were to cut the bag off of his hip or knock over his pot of gold. This is where it gets interesting. Well, as a DM, in part, I would be like, okay, well, obviously my leprechaun wouldn't continue attacking them because to leprechauns, their most important thing is gold. So it's like they wouldn't just keep attacking. They would drop everything immediately and they would start counting gold. So this immediately changes how you react as a DM in combat. So I like using the situation because it points out like you can still take small parts of real world mythology and apply it to your games, like, and it's still not game breaking. So like if you don't like to dabble into homebrew, but like you want to get out of the monotony as a DM for your characters other than just attack, 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 or to run, this is a really good way to do it is by implementing mythology characteristics. So you'll take so let's say you built like a gremlin or something that's similar to a leprechaun, or you're playing a character like this, you could kind of treat it as a leprechaun, um and give it kind of these quirks, and it also adds to your lore as basically the lore to your world, um because then it's like it gives your characters more opportunity other than just attack, attack, attack in combat. Like it gives them an opportunity to see, oh, hey, I can take a turn and try to figure out something that they're weak against. Because the other thing is leprechauns are in mythology known to handle magic. They're known to be very, very vicious and ferocious fighters, and they play dirty. So they're not an easy opponent, or they're not supposed to be, anyways. So here's the thing: is you can take these characteristics, you put it in your game, and then your characters at some point they see some version of it where it's like it comes through like, hey, if you knock this person's pot over, they're gonna have to stop and count their gold. um but of course you're not going to say that as a DM because you don't want to give them that. You want them to work for it. So you can have them make a check or something, a perception check, passive perception, or a passive knowledge check. So it's just kind of one of those things. It gives more to your world as a whole because it takes away that monotony of, as a DM and as a player, when you get into combat situations, your only choices are to fight in combat, because that's not true. You can use your wits. So like if you know a little bit about the species, or you take the time to make that check and then share that information, especially if you're going up against an opponent that is so much larger, greater, better, faster, stronger than you, it gives your team that opportunity to at least find a way to distract him and get out of there. So here's the other thing. We're gonna go back to fairies now that after I went on to that whole tirade and rambling session, we're gonna head back to fairies. So with fairies, here's another thing about fey creatures: is it also allows you to add other things to your world in different areas. So like let's say D&D lore says will-o-wisps are really only found in areas where there's tragic pain, or the ethereal plane, or it's just located somewhere in that general area. Well, based off of mythology lore and fae lore, it's will-o-wisps are, yes, they're ghosts, they're light seen, but they're usually seen in bogs or swamps or marshes. So it kind of gives you an area in which you can start placing your creatures at, other than just, oh, okay, we're in the woods, we're gonna come across XYZ type of situation. So that's kind of another plus you get from it. But then you also have things where, like, fairies, they're known to be very trickstery, but they're also, the thing about fairies in mythology lore is, yes, they're tricksters, but they consider themselves honest tricksters. So if you were to ever say a fairy broke their promise, they would be insanely insulted. Um, or if they broke their oath or whatever, if you basically accuse them of lying or anything like that, they would be extremely insulted, like to the point where they would probably bring down the vengeance upon generations on you. But in D&D lore, you lose all of that. Like there is a lot of lore in D&D about fae and where they come from and how they are, but you lose that aspect of they consider themselves genuine. So if they're going to say they're doing this, they're going to do it, but they're still going to use that loophole they know they put into the deal. So it allows you to play a character that's a little bit more, I guess, tricky with their words, and they're a little bit more, I don't know how to describe them. They're fun, but they're also very dangerous. They're a very dangerous type of fun in mythology. Another thing is there were in mythology, in real mythology, there are offerings and things like that you can use to appease the fae. So like if you were to insult one of these creatures, but you had bread and honey or bread and milk on you, you may be able to kind of appease them by making them that offering. So again, it's like if you get into a situation, let's say you're in the Feywild and you're in the courts, and you say something to accidentally highly insult a queen or somebody or high renowned in the Fae, or somebody that you're trying to get information from and trying to talk to and build a relationship with in your game. Let's say you insult them and then immediately they shut down. It stops everything because you've insulted their honor. You've told them they're not truthful. You told them they lie, or you told them they don't keep their promises. So the thing about Fae is if they don't keep their promises in mythology, they die. So that's why they always use loopholes. So if they promise you a creature or a deal or something, they're gonna fulfill that promise fulfilled to that word, to the T. But they're still gonna exploit the loopholes in it. So let's say you wish for a child. They're gonna bring you a child. It's just gonna be a changeling child that never ages. You see what I mean there? So it's like, but if they were to say, yeah, I promise to bring you a child, or I promise to give you a child, and they never fulfill that promise, the Fae intrinsically die because they did not fulfill that. So it's kind of one of those things. It's like that's why they take it like so personally when somebody accuses them of not fulfilling a promise. Basically, it means they're like dishonest, they're not right, or they're not a true Fae. That's even more insulting than anything. So let's say you insult this person or this Fae creature, and they just immediately shut down. They won't talk to you about anything. Well, maybe if you do a knowledge check or a wisdom check and you say, oh, well, I remember that Fae like milk and honey. And then if you happen to have some, then it could possibly negate a situation from getting worse and from feeling like your players just lost something, or your players are now like, well, what the hell can we do now? Type of situation. Uh, so it's just kind of interesting to see the difference between actual mythology and D&D mythos. And now with D&D mythos, I understand like there's only so much they can really do because let's face it, you can't put a world of mythology in a book. I mean, you can. It's just going to be really, really huge, bogged down, and overwhelming. So I think it's kind of nice because you can pull, even if you don't want to completely reskin your characters to fit more of real world mythology, you can take a creature or something and you can give it mythology characteristics to add to your world. Um, but that was just kind of my whole spiel on it. Hopefully it kind of opened eyes of some players. Oh, another interesting fact, goblins are also considered unseelie fae. So, like with D&D lore, that's something especially if you kind of want to try and pull from characteristics, like real world lore, there's a lot of like classes and races and stuff. Um, that we've kind of already gone over. It's like furbolgs, goblins, things like that. They're not considered fae, but they are fae in real world mythology. Uh, so that might be something to consider too. I think it's always nice kind of playing that because it then, instead of just having, because let's face it, D&D monsters, there's a small cluster, only a very very small cluster of fake creatures from the D&D monster books, and so breaking it down into actual like mythos based, um I guess, races or species, um so it gives you more a more fulfilled section, so you're not just working with pixies, fairies, and then like higher versions of them, fae, hags, things like that. You now work with goblins, trolls. You now work with hobgoblins and furbolgs. You now have things that you can build into that world to make it a little bit more robust. Um, but yeah, hopefully this video gave you guys some food for thoughts, and you guys can kind of do with it what you will. But that is about all I had to talk about today. Hopefully, it wasn't too much of a rush or too much information thrown at you. But I would definitely look into having, maybe taking characteristics from mythology and putting it into your game, just because it gives it a little bit more of a feel, and it breaks the monotony of combat, and it adds to your Fey lore, or it adds to whatever lore you're trying to use. I mean, this can even apply to dragon lore too. Oh my goodness, there's so much dragon lore out there. Um, but food for thought. Hopefully, y'all had a great time, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.